Well, hello, everyone. I was about to say good morning, but I realized that some of you are probably in the afternoon. So good morning and afternoon. Uh, I am so glad that you are here to share in this webinar that we're doing today. My name is Mark Roberts, and I'm a senior strategist for the Max Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary. I'm also the leader of what we call our third work. And our purpose in that work is to help people flourish in the third of life. And by that, we mean to live fully, to live fruitfully, and to live faithfully as disciples of Jesus. We've produced lots of resources to help folks flourish, to help churches help their people flourish. And you can find these resources in the third section of the Pree Center website. You'll find the link in the chat for that, and or you can just go to the Pree Center website, and it's pretty easy to find. Among the resources that we've produced, you'll discover a bunch of webinars that we've done in which we interview leaders of note who have wisdom about the third of life. And today we're going to add a new webinar interview as I talk with Dr. Hilda Davis. Let me just say a word about the game plan for the webinar before I introduce Dr. Davis. After I introduce her, she and I are going to have a conversation for about 35 minutes just between the two of us. And then there will be an opportunity for her to respond to your questions. If you have a question at any time during this webinar, please put it into the Q&A. There's a Q&A. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom, you can find Q&A. Don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. And then when the time comes, I will ask your questions for Hilda. I should also mention this webinar is being taped, and so after it's done, it will be available on our website and through YouTube. In case you want to look at something again or recommend it to your friends, use it in a class or whatever you want to do. So recently, in my work with the Pree Center's third initiative, I met the Reverend Dr. Hilda Davis. Now, I first learned about Dr. Davis through an article I just stumbled upon in Christianity Today. It was called How Older People Can Overcome Stereotypes and Flourish in Transition. And though I didn't know the author at the time, as I read the article, I thought, this is amazing. She and I are in so much alignment about third things. I need to learn more about her. So I found her website, learned more about Dr. Davis. I bought her book and read it. It meant a lot to me. And though, as she later explained, she'd written it primarily for Black women, and obviously I am not a Black woman, but there was so much wisdom in there that spoke to me. And so at that point, I thought, I need to meet this person. So I reached out to Dr. Davis by email, and soon we were having conversations, and she has become, you know, a good friend, but also a really important conversation partner, thought leader partner, and now a valued partner in the work of the Pree Center. She serves as one of the guides for our new third flourishing cohort program. And it's just been a joy for me to get to know Hilda, to learn from her. And I'm so glad I'm going to be able today to share her with you and for you to get to know her and her wisdom and the work she's doing. So Hilda, thank you so much for being with us and with me today. It's really good to have you here.
Thanks, Mark. I am honored to have the privilege of speaking to you and your people who are connected to the Pree Center. And I was startled and just happily surprised to just see how aligned we are with our beliefs about aging.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not often that I run across people who get it, or who has already preceded me in getting it. So it's been a pleasure and just a real honor to call you my friend.
Well, thank you so much. So Hilda, as I've gotten to know you and your work, really right from the very beginning, I mean, I found that you have a great passion for really a calling to serve people in the third of life. Tell me more about that calling. Tell us more about what has led you to this particular focus in your life and your work.
As my mother would say, just keep living. keep living, and pretty soon aging will be important to you too. But so as I got older, I began to notice more and more about how aging was perceived. Now, my mother worked part-time paid work until she was in her 80s.
Hmm.
So, and also other models, when I was in my 20s, I worked for the Title VII nutrition program for the elderly. And I saw so many vibrant and clearly older adults who clearly were not stagnant.
Hmm.
And so I had more models about vibrant people who were aging vibrantly. That's my new phrase,
Hmm.
vibrant
Hmm.
aging.
Hmm.
And then I had for the idea of that older adults, particularly women, are perceived as less capable. And no one, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when we talk about senior citizens, no one calls Warren Buffett a senior citizen.
Interesting. Yes, isn't that true? So when he's reported on, he's referred to as an investor, and all these things. That's so interesting. So um, yes. So the language of senior citizen can be kind of loaded. Do you want to say a little more about how language functions when we're talking about older people, and are there some things that we ought to know or ought to do or not do?
I came to my a big awareness about how important language is when I was an editor at the United Methodist Publishing House, where I started a curriculum for people with disabilities. And they fought a long battle at that time to get people first language, people
Mm,
first,
mm,
rather than disabled people. It was
mm,
people with,
mm.
and that has was embedded in how I think. So as I saw more and more older adults being labeled in a certain way, it just caught my attention. And also, in a sense, it frustrated me because it did not fully say who we are as vibrant people, who we are as powerful people. And even if I may say so, may I say this on your show, Mark? Sexy people. I mean, we don't even use the S
Yeah,
word,
yeah, yeah.
talk about older adults. And I that is just disappointing to me that at some point we feel that after 60, women, particularly Black women, put on these shapeless dresses and we sit in a rocking chair with a shawl around ourselves.
Mm.
So it is important how we talk about older adults because that becomes embedded in how we think about ourselves.
So that's so interesting and so true. One of the surprises for me as I dug into this work was that for many of us, and I am one in the third of life, the language of senior or senior citizen is not something we relate to or particularly appreciate. And I just had never thought about it. I sort of figured that people didn't want to be called elderly or whatever, but it turns out that the research shows that fairly neutral language like older adult or older people is the least loaded. Uh, but how we talk and how we think, it's so important. In your article, one of the things you wrote that really struck me, you said God calls us to create at every age. And then you said too often older adults are stuffed into outdated stereotypes that don't reflect who we are as individuals. And you were kind of alluding to that right then. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about how you see ageism as limiting our creativity? And then maybe any examples you have of older adults who really have been for you models of creativity?
Sure. It's the stereotypes certainly, and every group has to deal with stereotypes, every group. So being an older adult is no different. However, every group takes upon itself the role of defender or advocate for how we're called, because we know that how we what we call ourselves is how we're labeled and how we will act.
Mhm.
So it's as we talk about stereotypes, it's important that we not only live fully and flourish, because that debunks stereotypes, but we become an advocate for our own agency, for
Mhm.
that we be able to say, this is who I am, and I will not respond to anything other than that. And often the church may fall into some of those stereotypes, unfortunately,
Mhm.
as well as society. It's embedded in society. So, but I was in a Black church where the older adults were running things. I mean, it's you could not get past Sister So and So if you wanted to get anything done. I mean, she just
Mhm.
guarded everything from the kitchen to the finance room. She made decisions about it. And also, when my daughter was in elementary school, as an example of a vibrant older adult, I looked around for someone to fill the role of grandmother for her.
Mhm.
And I was directed to a woman named Utsi, who was in her 80s at that time. That tells you a little bit about her, that in her 80s, she allows people to call her Utsi.
Mhm.
And so I thought, oh, I looked at her, and she kind of fit the role of a grandmother type. And so offered my daughter to her to read to her. As it turned out, this woman had traveled internationally. She was a major fundraiser for two universities, to two HBCUs. And she just ran things in her sorority. And guess what? My daughter never got a chance to read to her because we were too busy taking her places, getting her to her meetings, and because she did not drive, but she drove others
Mhm.
to make sure she got these things done. So that she is one of my best examples. And I have a 99-year-old friend here in Houston who she just turned 99 on Monday. And she has a strong, booming voice. She wears gorgeous hats, and she is still um, a strong figure
Mhm.
in the community, in her church, and in my life. So it's, Mark, actually, as I talk about it, I may have fewer examples of older adults, well, say from 80 and 90, who are not actively engaged.
Mhm.
But if we talk for a moment about the 50s and 60s, this occurred to me. I know more women in their 50s and 60s, or let's say people who maybe took early retirement because of health reasons, and then they have become stagnant.
Mhm.
They're languishing.
Mhm.
And that's huge. I mean, certainly health issues are debilitating on our minds, bodies, and spirits. So in a sense, I want to talk for a few minutes to those people and what the church can do to reconnect them to their purpose, to reconnect them to their purpose.
I That's so interesting what you've said. And it does seem that there are many who are not well into the third, 80 and 80s and 90s, who are buying into a certain narrative of life that is limiting their contribution and their creativity. So what would you want to say to these women. I know you work a lot with women, but your stuff is relevant to those of us who are men too. What would you say to folks who are in their 50s and 60s who are maybe running the risk of just, getting into that rocking chair and pulling up the shawl?
That's amazing. I had that in my notes, the rocking chair with the shawl, as how people depict or think about older
Yeah.
women.
I had a 80-year-old man. I was leading a retreat, and he was complaining that his family wants him to slow down, and he likes living life and making a difference and contributing in a variety of ways. And what he said to me, he didn't have the shawl. He said they just want me to sit on the porch and walk and drink my beer.
And
So,
and not to digress, but I know we'll get to it, but family, let's put a pin in that, how
okay.
they can be as self-limiting.
Yeah. So what would you want? But what would you want to say? Because I'm sure we've got a bunch of folk in this webinar and folks who will be watching later who are in their 50s and 60s, and they're thinking,
Is
man, what do I need to hear?
that it I think this is where this church can play a powerful, powerful role. Because as I look around at churches, I was the founding director at at the Tennessee Department of Health of the Faith-Based Initiative, and I work with churches across the state. And they would have senior citizen ministry. They call it senior citizen ministry for the most part. And it would be about bingo or something, the how to avoid scams. I mean, that's important. None of this, I don't
Mhm.
want to diminish any of this. How to avoid scams. Excuse me. And also, this topic, this gets me so excited. How to avoid scams. And another one is getting detectors or smoke detectors in their home. I mean, again, all of these are fine. And I've been to these programming events at churches. But people in their 50s and 60s, and maybe even 70s and 80s, want to, let's say 90s, because Mrs. Reed, who is the one who turned 99, taking computer classes.
Mm.
And it wasn't the church that offered them, it was the community center. So why can't we pull in those functions that a community center does, say, and
Mm.
offer classes? I would love to see churches offer business classes that talk about being an entrepreneur. I've always thought of myself as an entrepreneur, but I'm more of a church lady than an entrepreneur for real.
Mm.
But so what if we could combine the two of them? Think outside the box. I mean, it's just, if we put as much energy into, let's, older adult ministries as we do into youth ministries, then our older adults could flourish more and would not languish
Mm.
at 50 and 60. I mean, I have had clients who had to take early retirement, and the church was not an option for them to help them repurpose or find a new purpose for their lives. What I love about your curriculum is that you help older adults think about what it means to have a new vision for their life. What are their longings for their lives
Mm.
and purpose? So I thank you for that, Mark, because
Mm.
it will literally, and I know you know it has, but it's also changed my life. Just thinking about
Well,
those things.
I appreciate that. And I've got a great illustration for what you just suggested that was very surprising when it first came. So the church I go to is a really fine but smaller church near in Southern California where I live. And we're probably 70% older adults, which is not uncommon for many churches.
Yeah.
And so when we came out with the Flourishing in the Third Third of Life course, my pastor wanted to do it for his people. Now, this is a church, we have maybe, oh, I don't know, 75 people in worship on Sunday. So he thought, we're going to get good turnout for this. We're going to probably get 15, which for that church, a good turnout. So we did it on a Wednesday night. There were over 30 people.
Wow.
But the reason is that there were about 15 from the church, but they would mention it to their friends in the community, and their friends in the community are saying, oh, I need something like that. And because there's such a vacuum of things that help people flourish. Now, what you said, there are things for senior adults that have to do with things that matter in life, right? How to sign up for Medicare and how to, as you say, how to avoid scams. But there is very little out there that's saying, we really want to help you live well, or as you're saying, live vibrantly, which I love. And I hope you'll let me quote that with
Please.
credit, because, and so all of a sudden, this little church, thinking it was going to get 15, had 30, or I think a couple more than 30, half of them from the community who just really were hungering for this stuff. So what you're talking about, the church, really makes a lot of sense. So can I ask you a question about your book and the stuff you've done there? One of the things I really appreciated about your book is you've structured it in a way that somebody like me can understand, and you found the word sacred to be helpful. And obviously sacred is a good biblical word, but why is sacred helpful for folk who are in the third of life and want to live well, want to live vibrantly?
What a wonderful question. Because God calls us, one, into relationship with God, and two, into relationship with each other. And that is sacred ground. That is sacred ground. Whenever we come in contact with one another and with God in that number, it is sacred. And it just grew out of the sense that working together to flourish is God's work.
Mm.
It is God's work. It is not an accident, Mark, that you and I met.
Mm.
It is not an accident that now the idea of aging is being critiqued and interrogated, and people are looking at it in new ways. So this is not an accident. Well, one, we boomers never do anything by half. And so as we age, there is not one of my friends who is a grandmother who is called grandma. It's Mimi or Nana or Gigi or
Mhm.
Duchess or Honey.
Mhm.
We have just reinvented our not only our language but what it means to live as sacred and fully flourishing, living abundantly. We're rewriting that. We're
Mm.
rewriting that, and you're at the forefront of that in the church. So this is
Mm.
sacred work. It is work that God calls us to because it connects to our purpose, what God created us to be created.
So true. One of the things I know, having read your book, is that you use the letters in sacred to talk about different aspects of life that are really important for wellness. I won't ask you to talk about all six of them because that would probably take too much time. But is there any one letter, SACRED, any one letter you might want to mention what it stands for and why it's important?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, creativity, the C in sacred, I think that is so, so important because once we lose the once we no longer think of ourselves as creative, nothing else matters. We are co-creators with God. I mean, I just love the thought of that when we do something new, it is what God intends. When we are curious, it is what God intends. When we continue to live in our purpose does not retire. Our purpose is what God embedded in us in our mother's womb. So when we continue that work, we are being creative, and that's what God calls us to. So
Mm,
for me, because women so often say, I'm not creative.
mm.
And I say, well, do you cook? Oh yeah. Everybody wants my cake. You're creative. Do
Right.
you
Yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead, please? I'll
I was
I'll
just to say, yeah, we tend to we think of creativity as the stuff of artists and musicians, and don't realize that not only all of us have the capacity, but we're actually probably exercising our creativity in many ways. So your cooking example is a good one, which, by the way, that's not my answer. I am not creative when it comes to cooking. I'll stick with other things.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say I'm not creative because Mark,
But
I,
you,
I have I talk about your curriculum all the time.
uh, well, thank you. But I'm just saying my curriculum is I mean my creativity is somewhat limited to the certain thing. But isn't that the point? And you talk that it's finding where God has gifted you and has given you talents and help. And isn't that funny? Because we think to do that with children, right?
Right. Yes.
But we
Right.
tend to not think to do that with folk who are older. It's really struck me that when you're around 20, everybody's asking you, what are you going to do with your life? What is your purpose and all that sort of thing. And but when you retire, if that's your road, but when you hit your 60s, nobody's saying, what are you going to do with your life? Even though it's likely, if you hit 65 today in the United States, your life expectancy is well over 10 years, getting close to 20 years. So you're going to have a lot of life left. And nobody is saying, what are you going to do with your life? So,
No one. No one.
yeah. Well, before we're getting a couple of questions, which is great. I don't want to get there quite yet, but those of you who asked them, thank you. And I'll pass them on soon. One of the things I loved about your book was that it has lots of ideas, and it's both sort of psychological because you're trained in that way, and it's educational because you're trained in that way, and you're also a pastor, and so it's this. But you also have a lot of practical stuff, like have an action plan. Why is that important for folk to have the action plan?
I said to my cohort that I started my doctorate work in theology, and after a few classes, I realized I have no idea what they're talking about. This is just way beyond me. All of these abstract ideas, and I jumped over into the pastoral counseling program, which suited me well. I am a very basic thinker, and I want to know, what do I do? How do I do this? And so it grew purely out of my own needing to know, how do I do this? Okay, the why, that's fine. The who, yes, but how do I get it done? And how do I make myself accountable? What do I do? What steps do I take? I'm a big s- taking steps person. Okay, you do this, this. But I also like it to be fun. And I want people to know that there are steps you can take, but you don't have to take these steps in this order, but just take action. One of my quotes from the book is, when you begin to think about it, you've already taken action.
Mm.
So for me, it's pondering is not my strong point. I, I'm one of these who act, think, reflect. I'm like, oops, okay. I would not recommend that really, but action is important for change. God is always doing something new. Always doing something new.
Great. Uh, Before we get to the questions from folk, and I'm getting some over here, and that's going to be great. But I want to pick up with family because you mentioned family. Uh, And the sense being that, your family can either really help you flourish in the third of life or not. What are some of your thoughts on family?
And you mentioned family in relation to the gentleman who was being limited
Right.
because, but even though my family is my safe space and my place of renewal, my own daughter will say, "Mommy, are you sure that's what they, what, how can you do that? Here, let me take care." I'm like, really? And have we gotten to that point now where you're you've relegated me to you're taking care of me? And it's fine. I'm glad she's a great daughter.
Mhm.
However, families, younger members of the family, can sometimes not think of our getting older, as still being strong and resourceful. But I did the same thing to my mother. I mean, when we go to the grocery store, I would try to grab all the packages, and she'd say, "Hilda, I can do this." So it's just the nature of the beast. So family is for many of us a safe space, but it's also, we have to sometimes resist the stereotypes our family may have of our capabilities. And regardless of where we are on the range of capabilities, there's something we can do, Mark. And this is where I would love to see the church step up, like these community centers.
Mm.
What, making it possible to do something.
Well, y- yes, and that's great. And as you know, you and I are sharing in that work. And the thing I must say I'm encouraged about is as I talk with church leaders, pastors, and other church leaders, including younger ones, I'm hearing more and more concern about this and interest and desire, and partly because as they look at the aging of their congregation or the aging of their community, rather than thinking, oh, this is a terrible thing, they're thinking, God has called us to not just care for these people. See, that's the old model, but to be good community together and to empower them. And what I hear again and again from folks, especially younger pastors, I don't have any idea what to do. I talked to a pastor in Georgia who said, I am literally half the age of my youngest member.
Wow. Yeah.
And but he was reaching out to us because he wants to be a good pastor. So I'm encouraged. Hey, we're getting a bunch of questions, and these are good questions, and I really want to pass these on to you. They're very thoughtful. So Rick asks, sorry, Rick, if I just outed you and you wanted to hide, but Rick asks, I have the opposite problem that Mark mentioned when a large majority is older. We moved a year ago across the country to Colorado, and we visited many churches. There seems to be no ministries for people my age, 67. They don't have men's groups that meet during the day. For women, there are better and more get-togethers, but for men, it seems that church leaders don't care. I feel that I need to go outside the church to find things to do. I met with pastors who didn't seem to care what our spiritual gifts were, probably because we are too old. Thoughts?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I am sorry for that. Is it Rick? What is it?
Yes, Rick.
Rick. Because I have a male friend who is a pastor. And when he read my book, he said, "Well, when are you going to write one for men? Why are you always talking about women?" And yeah, you're I have seen it, and there's a huge deficit in programs that address men's particular yearnings and creativity. Creativity. So, well, Rick, okay, I'm going to voluntold you and get you on this and let me know how it turns out, if I can offer any suggestions, and possibly have Mark's program at your church to begin to unpack. And as you say, going outside of the church, I've mentioned several times, community. These are the people who are addressing these needs. So I would be interested to know what you come up with, Rick. You can do
Yeah,
it.
me too. By the way, Rick, so you can email me at the Pree Center, markroberts@fuller.edu. And I'd really love to learn more, and we can go back and forth on that, because honestly, I think part of the answer, so I've said there are some pastors who really do care. I'm sure there's some who don't as much, not because they aren't caring people. They feel overwhelmed. There's just too much going on. They can't. And this actually is a huge opportunity
Mm.
for those of us who are in the third of life to step into leadership. So back when I was a pastor, somebody said, "Hey, pastor, we need a program for something." I'm like, "Oh, I don't have any time." If somebody came to me and said, "We need a program for something and I'd like to lead it," I'd be like, "Oh, thank you." God bless you. So let's talk about that. Okay, we got an anonymous attendee. So this one is just, we'll call this anonymous. Thank you so much for sharing. Much needed area for the body of Christ and people in general. Question: how should we respond when we feel disregarded by the younger generation, especially when you're one of the few older ones, or maybe the only older adult on the job? Sometimes I feel hurt. Should we just pray to not care how we're regarded? We can't prove what is happening, but it is. Maybe perhaps it's best to live in an environment with more older individuals? Question mark.
Oh, that is actually is one of my, we were talking about that before we got on the call, how we're perceived as maybe invisible or not having capabilities. And so I am sorry that that has happened to you. And so I believe that there are a couple of things that come to my mind is, and one is not being voiceless and just continuing to, maybe assert is too strong a word, but just to not step back when in being dismissed. I have to be careful sometimes because I get my feelings hurt and I think, I don't, yes, know I don't know this. And it's not because I'm old, it's just that I don't know it. And it's okay not to know. So it's a very sensitive area as we get older. And another thing is, even as we step forward and use our voice, showing some compassion for ourselves, showing ourselves the compassion of, well, of course my feelings are hurt because they are trying to limit me, or maybe they're not, maybe they're just unaware of what they are doing.
Mhm.
So it's up to you to decide that, but be compassionate to yourself,
Mm.
because it can be hurtful. It can be hurtful. Just it's all over the place. This ageism, it's all over the
Mhm.
place. So
Yeah.
we're all beginners in this. So be compassionate to yourself, even as you speak up and maybe help educate them.
Yeah, that's a good word. I appreciate it. Be compassionate with yourself. Some years back, I had an opportunity to do something through my professional life at the Pree Center that I was really excited about. I've been invited to do something, and then I got disinvited. And I got disinvited because certain members of the committee want a younger voice.
Mm, mhm.
And like you said, that really hurt. I was just disappointed. I was sad. That really wasn't a place where I could speak up much. And the person who was communicating to me was not of that mindset and was very sorry. But it really did hurt. The other thing I was just going to say, it would really so partly to be compassionate to yourself, let yourself say, yeah, that really hurts. It also just really helped at that point to have some people in my life who listen well to me, a
Mm,
couple good friends. I'm my spiritual director. And because I really grieved that for a while. And it was the first time I think I was 58 at the time. So it was that was anyway, I do appreciate the question. And Hilda, thanks for your counsel. So this one, Hilda, is from a man named Loy. And
Oh,
Loy, Loy. Loy says, could you comment on relationships, community, church, family, and what wellness looks like with respect to third relationships?
hi, Lloyd. So I miss you. Okay. Um, it's I'm glad that you brought up the Mark, that you brought up the community, because one of my thinking from an article that I wrote called "Cultivating That Which Is Dormant." I talk about the uh the necessity, the just absolute necessity, and being in that small group, Mark, last year, your flourishing in the third of life curriculum, being in that small group helped me to know the value of relationships in small groups. So one thing is, but it has to be a safe small group, just the assurance that it's a safe and confidential space, certainly, which is what you create. So it's being able to come together in small groups. Now, am I getting off? What?
No?
Look, it's like, this isn't because I'm old, it's because
Well, part of your answer, I mean, a key part of your answer is that the kind of community that helps us flourish in the third is going to happen in smaller group relationships of some sort, right?
absolutely, because there were only 6 of us. Um, and sometimes I was hesitant to speak even in a group of 6. A group of 60, I'm not going to say a word.
Mhm,
I absolutely will not, even
mhm.
16. So having a safe small group, and also if I am remembering the question correctly, that the church, I talked about, I mean, as I was writing notes for this, I said, why can't there be just little coffee clatches or like drop-in center type of thing for the church for older adults? Like I love my granddaughter, but I don't want a 6-year-old in this space. It's just for older adults. And to get to know each other and to develop relationships. So because I don't get out as much as I once did. I no longer do a lot of going to events. I mean, COVID just changed that drastically, even though things have opened up. But if at the church they had just a drop-in center, I would drop in. It's not a commitment to anything, and I can build relationships. I live close to a Y, and Y's slogan, this Y is, it's a community. It's not a something. It's not a gym. It's a community.
Mhm.
And the church can say it's not um preaching. It's a community. I mean, it's a community, and we lose sight of that by having so much programming. So why not just, as Seinfeld, it's a ministry about nothing. Just drop in and build relationships. That's the whole key to that. Build relationships. Lloyd, if I did not answer your question, contact me and I will do better. But yeah.
In the third course, and of course this, Hilda, we talk about 3 types of relationships that are particularly important, not that others aren't. And the one you're really talking about is peer relationships, how to develop closer and deeper peer relationships. The next is intergenerational relationships that and if you are a grandparent or you have nieces and nephews who are young, that can be sort of built into your life. But there's great benefit to both the younger and the older person in the intergenerational. We also talk about mentoring, and we've discovered this is something that where there's tremendous potential at the Pree Center. We're really just beginning this program we call Alongside, which is going to be to um, at least at the beginning, to help folks who have potential for mentoring to begin to do that with folks and develop that kind of relationship. So there's a lot of potential. Uh, we had a couple of questions that people asked what sacred means. So we put that in the chat in case you're one that's wondering, what that means. It's in her book. And the other thing, let me just say, is we've got the link to Hilda's book in the chat, and you can learn more about sacred. I got to say, what I loved about your letters is, okay, you're a spiritual person, spirituality is important, but that wasn't a surprise. The surprise is, for me, activates. You talked about that today, creativity, and then determination. I just thought, oh, that's so right. It's people talk a lot about resilience. That's pretty close. So anyway, yeah, get Hilda's book. And I told you, as a white man, I was not the primary target, but there is wisdom there that's for all human beings. And actually, those of us who are white men have a lot to learn from people who don't look just like us. So that's my recommendation. Hey, we have another question. We're getting near the end of our time, but this is a good. How do we get people to see that they still have something to give and something to learn as they get older?
Thank you for that. And
That's by the way, from Anna.
Anna, thank you for that question. And I had a client once who a friend of hers paid for her to uh, visit with me, for us to have counseling sessions. And I would recommend, one, not doing it for them. That doesn't work. So, I mean, she showed up, but she wasn't fully engaged. She didn't believe that she knew that she was not investing in herself, but she didn't believe that there was something she could do about it. And there was nothing I could do to make her see it,
Mm.
regardless of my words. What has I'm thinking that what has to happen is there has to be something that captures people's passion, their purpose, their interest, and then they see a reason, they have a reason to become involved. Now, she was very involved in her son's life. He is an actor and just got a TV program.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, she was the impetus behind that. But for her own life, what engages her, we can't do it, Anna. I wish I had an acronym for engage, make people engage, or an action step or plan for that. But what the church can do, and what possibly we as individuals can do, is have an array of things that, as an option, going back to cultivate that which is dormant.
Mm.
I have always loved museums, but I've never worked in one or applied to one or volunteered at one until recently. I've become a museum volunteer, and I think I'm going to become a docent. So there are things that are in each of us that are dormant. So maybe talking about this is where that small group comes in, where Mark's group is perfect because it has a section on purpose, and help people begin to think about their purpose, not in terms of, well, I go to church, well, I serve on the Ladies Guild and the this, that, but what is it that is dormant in you that is yet to be revealed and acted upon?
Mm.
So
I love that way of thinking, that it's like it's asleep or gone to sleep. And I think
yeah,
of a couple of women that I've known through the courses. They've taken our third flourishing course. And one was a retired teacher who had a decent life, but had really not been giving away much to others after her retirement. And it's like all she needed was somebody to tell her, hey, God still has a purpose for your life. And she went to her local elementary school, said, I'm a retired teacher. I could give a couple hours a week to help at anything. Do you need anything? They're like, oh, we could use you on the playground. You don't have to be in charge of it, but just to be with the students and just to be present there. So she started doing that, and she was really excited. The other person I think of is somebody who she in the course, at the end of the course, she said, I retired 9 months ago, and until recently I thought that was the worst decision I'd ever made in my life, because I thought I was done making a difference in the world, and I was miserable. So she wasn't yet at the point of discovering what that is. And I think you're right. I think the church can be helpful to, on the one hand, just open up for folks the stories of people who are living fruitfully and who are flourishing, and not to deny the challenges, right, and the difficulties. I mean, it's not as if older adulthood is just all one big happy party. There are difficulties and losses, but to for people to see, and then, as you talk about small group or through relationships, begin to discover what God has for you. So, well, Hilda, we are right near the end of our time, and again, for those of you in this webinar, I'm just so glad to be able to introduce Hilda to you. We've got the link to her website where you can learn more about her and her resources. Her book, Live Healthy and Be Well, is at Amazon, and I commend it. It spoke to me. You can learn more about sacred, and it's delightful, as well as just really helpful. Before we close up with Hilda, I want to mention we have another webinar coming up in a month with Dr. Amy Hansen. Dr. Hansen is an expert in aging in the church. She's a PhD gerontology professor. She felt a calling to work with older adults when she was 23, and she began leading a church ministry at 23. And I don't know how old Amy is now. She's in her 40s or something, but I mean, she's done this a long time. She has tremendous wisdom in the knowledge too. So that's coming up on Monday, May 8th, and we'll have more information about that. But Hilda, this has just been such a, to me, first of all, just a delight to be able to talk with you about these things, but also to be able to share some of your wisdom with others. Do you have well, before we leave, I want to make sure I underscore vibrant aging. I've never heard that before, and I'm pretty excited about that. So we need to talk more about that. Any last words you want to share with folk before we sign off?
I want to thank you and the Pree Center for this opportunity. It is just amazing to be able to do this work in partnership with somebody who shares my vision that it's important and that we can flourish at this stage of our life and just continue to flourish, not just stop. The recognition that flourishing does not stop. It continues. So
Yeah.
I just want to offer that our purpose does not retire, our passion doesn't retire, and flourishing never stops.
Mm, great word. And thank you. And we at the Pree Center are so pleased to be partnering with you. And I've got some great teammates. You've met some of them. Some of them I could be their father in terms of age, but they're not those that look upon me as some washed up person. And I'm delighted to be a part of the Pree Center and its work. And then to have partners like you, that is such a gift. So anyway, friends, if you are interested in our work, we put links up, interested in Hilda's work, links up. You can always come to the Pree Center. as you've kind of heard, if you're new to the Pree Center, the third initiative is one piece of our work, but we really seek to help leaders in the wider marketplace, not just church leaders, but leaders in the wider marketplace flourish. We could use that language, really to discover and live out their callings, and to discover what it is to live and work in a distinctively Christian way. And we have a whole lot of different things that we love to share with folks, different resources. So I'd encourage you to check out the work of the Pree Center. So again, Hilda, thank you. It's been so good to have you here. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to Jessica, who gave us a lot of tech support. And if you're able, look forward to seeing you next month when we do another webinar with Dr. Hanson. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for all the questions and the participants. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate it.